Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first Novacura North America Lunch and Learn. We're excited to have everyone here. As many of you all know, there's been several of these events in Sweden, but there was some feedback from US customers that a lunch and learn at 2 a.m. was less than ideal, so we're excited to bring this to you today. I am your host, Ben Meissner. Many of you all know me. I started at Novacura just under 5 years ago as a product support engineer and recently moved into a position as account manager. So I'm excited to continue to work with all of you to attain the maximum potential out of Novacura Flow. Now let's meet our panelists. Joining me today, we have three panelists from Jensen Precast. We have Josh Burns and Sophia Harrigan. Josh is a software development manager and has been with Jensen Precast for just over 5 years. He's led the development of hundreds of workflows, and it's really been a pleasure working with him over the years and seeing his team showcase what a company looks like when they maximize the functionality offered by Novacura Flow. Joining him is Sophia Harrigan. She's a software developer who has been working at Jensen Precast for 2 years as part of the Flow development team, and we're really excited to have them with us. Next is Paul Phillips. He's the Director of Product Management, and for those of you who haven't had the pleasure of working with Paul, he started as a customer working with Greg Warner on a mobile work order app, and he really saw the potential for the future of Novacura. He's been instrumental in improving the functionality of Flow, from incorporating Microsoft AI services to enabling Bluetooth functionality, and more recently leading the labs team to develop the Flow marketplace. So first up is Josh Burns and Sophia with the Jensen Precast customer journey.
Thanks, Ben. So my name is Josh Burns. I'm the software development manager at Jensen Precast. A little bit about Jensen Precast. We're a precast concrete company. We were founded in 1968 by Don Jensen. He's still currently the CEO of the company, comes in the office every day. We manufacture a number of precast concrete products related to infrastructure. So we do a lot of manholes, septic tanks, highway barrier. Basically, if it's made out of concrete anywhere in the Western United States, you see a manhole cover, our stuff is likely underneath it. With that, in the precast concrete industry, there's a lot involved in our manufacturing processes that is kind of non-standard when it comes to manufacturing. You think of manufacturing being, like you have to go through, step A, step B, step C, and all of that. And precast concrete manufacturing is a little bit different in that there's a lot of work that has to be done on our concrete forms, basically the molds that we use to form our product. And then we pour stuff into it and it sits for a number of hours, and then more things happen after that. So a lot of the software that exists out there for things like manufacturing, for things like transportation and dispatch, a lot of that doesn't work off the shelf for us. So that puts us in a position in which we have had to custom develop a lot of software over the years to support our business processes. So we're going to highlight a couple of those things today. The first of which being our proof of delivery app. A little bit of background on that. In the past, what we've done, which is not very different from what a lot of other companies have done, is we ship product out to our customers. It goes to a job site. We offload our trucks, and then we have a piece of paper that gets signed. That paper has to come back to the office. Once it's back in the office, somebody has to type all the information back into a system, and then that can be invoiced and whatnot. As you can imagine, with paper changing hands and bad handwriting at times and things getting lost, you end up with a lot of errors, a lot of missed information, bad data, and that causes delays for our processes. It causes sometimes mistakes on invoices for customers. So that was problematic for us. So we needed to develop something that would allow us to make that process a bit more digital and reliable. We knew that needed to be a mobile app, that we could utilize some type of mobile device like a tablet to use. So when we launched IFS, which is the ERP that we're currently on in 2019, we had planned on building out this mobile application to handle that. So we went through a number of attempts at figuring out what we wanted to use for developing these applications. And in that search, we came upon Novacura. And me being in development for now over 25 years, I was initially a little skeptical of Novacura because it seemed a little too simple. It's like, okay, so you basically create a flow chart, and that flow chart is going to do all these things for you. I mean, I'm a coder. This is not in my nature to really like this kind of thing. And so we decided basically within like a POD kind of proof of concept to POD, meaning proof of delivery. We had Greg and another person out there from Novacura come to our office, and we decided the way that we're going to do it is we're going to internally on our development team try and build out something that would work for that, and then have these Novacura folks, you know, try and do something similar, and we'll kind of see how that compares. And my team spent about 3 weeks building out a simple proof of concept, and then the Novacura folks came out and built out basically an identical proof of concept in about 45 minutes. And that was pretty much the selling point for me. I was like, okay, well, that's undeniable. I mean, it's faster, it's easier to use. Does it allow for the complete custom control of every tiny little thing? No, but I mean, the speed and efficiency at which you can knock stuff out was far superior to me than, you know, customization at a very nuanced level. So we went with Novacura. We've been using it now for, I think, about 4 years. And it's really helped us with a lot of our mobile development against IFS, as well as some of our desktop applications, and a lot of our headless backend flows for integrations and synchronization of data and that kind of stuff. So with that, we're going to go ahead and show you guys our proof of delivery flow. We're going to walk through the flow itself in Studio, and we're going to have some screenshots of the flow from the tablet and how it works. And to walk you through that, I'll hand it over to Sophia, as she has become kind of our strongest Novacura developer. So Sophia, why don't you go ahead and show them what you got.
Thank you, Josh. My name is Sophia. Again, I'm a software developer at Jensen, and I'm going to walk through today the Studio and some pictures from the tablet of our POD app. This app is used every day here, and it's pretty vital to our business processes here, and it really streamlines a lot of things for us. It is primarily our truck drivers that are using it, and one thing about them is a lot of them are not super tech savvy. So the idea to them of using a tablet, you know, for their everyday job, a lot of them are a little hesitant about it until they really get into Novacura, and then once they get familiar with it, it's pretty user friendly. So a lot of them, you know, have become accustomed to using it. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So this is our POD app. This is obviously in the Studio here. So to start off, we gather some basic user information. So our truck driver logs in with his account, and from this we can get their name and the site that they're from, and we use that information down the line. After
Sophia,
that,
I'm sorry not to cut you off. I don't know if anybody else is having this issue, but I'm not seeing your screen. I'm still just seeing you. Is anybody else having that problem?
oh, okay. Yes, probably.
Yep.
Okay.
There we go. That's much better.
Okay. Okay, so again, this is where we get our user information. This is the Studio for POD. So after we get our user information there, we get the trucks for the site that driver is from. So again, using that information that we pulled in the beginning, we only show the trucks that actually have shipments for that day. So we're not just displaying, 20 trucks for the driver to pick from. We have some of our trucks that are considered outside trucks, so we rename those to make it easier for our drivers to know which ones are outside trucks and which ones are our trucks in-house too. After that, we just verify that there are trucks for that day. If there's not, we show a message to the driver saying, hey, you don't have any trucks or any shipments for today on a truck. If there are, then we go ahead and have the user select their truck. And again, I'll show screenshots of this afterwards from what it looks like on the tablet. And then once they've chosen their truck, based on whether or not it is considered an outside truck, that just changes our query slightly. We get the shipments for that day, verify that there are shipments for today, and then we have our driver choose the shipment. After that, we pull approver information. So part of our process is once the shipment is delivered, we have approvers at each branch that go in actually in the web client in Novacura and verify all the information is correct and look at the pictures and the document that we upload and actually start the process to close out the shipment in IFS through Novacura. So here we're just verifying that there is approver information for that site. If not, then the driver will enter an approver email. And again, we validate that it's the correct format. If they already have one, then we go ahead and move on to this shipment comparison information. I'll show more of what we use this for later in the flow, but we have had issues in the past where a driver's in the middle of delivering a shipment and something changes in the record in IFS and the information is now mismatched. So later in the flow, we actually do a comparison to verify that the information is still matching. And then we refetch the shipment here, again, to verify if anything changed. Now it's up to date on the tablet. If for some reason we can't find that shipment, we actually kick it back to the initial shipment search and then go from there. And if it can't find it, if for some reason it was deleted, that's when it goes back and it'll actually exit out of the flow. If it does exist, then we verify if the customer already has an email in our system. If not, then we get the default email for that customer in IFS. That might not be specific to this shipment. And if we do find a default email, we actually use that down the line as well. And then at this point, we pull the shipment line. So up until now, we had only pulled like general shipment information. This will actually pull each thing that's on the shipment and get quantities and information about that. And then we also verify, hey, is there actually something to deliver on the shipment? And then in here, we're just calculating a list for all these things. So each of these things could possibly have multiple records. So a shipment could be from multiple orders, or it could have multiple sales reps. So it's just getting a list of those. And then this is the first step for the driver that actually is for the delivery. So in here, we can see that this right here will actually have the address, and the driver can tap on that and it will open some sort of map application on the tablet, and then they can get directions to their job site. The rest of this information is general shipment information. We put on there the on-site contact and phone, so the driver can get a hold of whoever's at the job site. Generally, they need to be in contact. These are notes that were from the shipment in IFS, and then the driver can actually also put in their own notes. So if for some reason the customer rejects the product or something, the driver can make a note there. And then down here is actually where we display the list of shipment lines. And this is where the driver would go in and adjust quantities if necessary. Then we do some more checks just to make sure that the quantities entered were valid. So we don't allow our drivers to over deliver. It has to be in between the maximum for the line and below that. And we also just verify that there are quantities entered at all. And then the next part of this flow, we actually have in a fragment because we do use this next section in 2 of our flows, so the other one being our report picking flow, because it has a similar process if it's a will call and the customer is coming to pick up the product instead. So in this part of the flow, we send over a ton of information, which most of it being some of that comparison information that I mentioned before, but we send over shipment information, shipment line, information about the driver, stuff like that. And then initially here we get the site address and phone number for the current site that the driver is from. And then due to COVID, we actually had to change. We were collecting signatures on the tablets, but we had to update that so that the customers didn't have to find the tablet. So we actually added this alternate signature text instead. It basically just says we're not collecting signatures right now and where they can get a proof of delivery if they want one. And then this leads to our delivery summary for the customer. So in here, we grab the GPS location because we do use that for tax purposes. And this is for the customer to review. And so, put the shipment information, the customer, the sales rep, and then we do list out, again, those shipment lines that were delivered. In here, we have this customer email. So this will either default to an existing customer email if we have it. If not, or if they want to change it, they can enter it in here and they will actually get a copy of our proof of delivery document. And then they have to enter in their name as well. Once that is done, we just verify if they entered an email that it's a valid email. And then we actually update in our system that email for that customer. And then here, this is actually where we get into that comparison. So with that issue of the driver is in the middle of delivering something and something gets changed in IFS, we can check this by, again, pulling all those shipment fields if they have a different object version, which is like our unique identifier for each one. We actually go through and evaluate every single field to see if they're different. And if we find any that are different, we display them to the driver, basically saying, hey, something has changed in this data. And from there, they have to decide if they want to cancel out of the shipment, if something went wrong, or if they want to just continue if it was just something small that changed. And then at this point, we actually will send an email if there's no GPS coordinates. Sometimes with the tablets, we notice that the location services can get turned off and then we're not receiving those GPS coordinates. So an email actually gets sent to myself when a truck driver delivers something and there's no GPS coordinates attached, and then we can kind of go from there with resolving that. At this point, we then update the shipment record and the shipment line. So if the driver updated any notes or quantities or anything, we set the shipment status to completed, which is our next step in IFS after it's been delivered. If we have an approver email, we send them an email telling them that they have a shipment that they need to go in and approve. And then we begin the process of creating our POD document. So this area here is kind of just collecting all the information we're going to need. We do create our own POD document in here, which I'll show a glimpse of. This is just a little bit, but we do have our HTML and CSS and get it all formatted all in the script step here. And then we go through the process of, adding in pages, getting rid of any trailing empty pages, depending on whether or not it has a signature. That's how we create the initial PDF page. After that, if there are more pages, we kind of loop through and append those pages onto the initial one. After that, we start the process of actually uploading that document to our FTP server. And then again, we get to another fragment. We use this in a few of our flows. So this one basically just creates a new reference and links that document to a main object within IFS. So this is a pretty simple fragment here. And then back in our original flow, if the customer did enter in an email, we do send an email notification to the customer, and we attach the POD document that we just created, and we give them all the information, like the job name and the truck driver. Then we actually display to the driver the POD notification. So if they need to look at that POD document, they can. And then we also let them know that the notification was sent to the approver so that it could be finalized there. So at this point, we go back into our original POD flow out of that fragment. And then we actually get set up to go into another fragment where we allow our drivers to take pictures. So we like to have pictures for each shipment that we deliver. So we ask the driver to upload or take photos. And then from there, kind of a similar process as the POD document, but we set the image file names. We get the number of images so we know how many are supposed to upload. We register the document. If there are no errors, we go ahead and upload those to the FTP servers. Again, this is the same fragment as before. That was this to link to a main object there. And then we do that. We loop through for each image that the driver uploads, because they can upload as many as they would like. And then if there are no errors with that, we let them know that they have successfully uploaded their images. And then we let them know how many were successfully uploaded to. So at this point, they're kicked back into our original flow here. And instead of making them exit out and then go back in each time that they might have another shipment after the initial one, we put them back in here, and then we check again for if there are other shipments for that day that they might need to deliver. If there's not, then we just send them a message that says, hey, there's no more for today. If there are, then they can restart this process again. So that's the studio back end of it. I'll go ahead and show some actual pictures of what it looks like on the tablet. So this is what it looks like initially when they open the tablet. It'll say their name here. They'll go into our proof of delivery app. We do put the Jensen logo up there, and we just have them tap there to select the truck. And then the next screen, after they've picked their truck, they then choose their shipment for that day. And then this is where they enter in the information that the driver needs. So this is where they can tap right here if they want to get directions to the job site that they're going to. We showed, again, general shipment information. We want to make sure that they verify they're going to the right place and it's the right shipment. We list our sales rep, so in case the driver even needs to get a hold of the sales rep, and also that on-site contact and phone number so they can coordinate with the people on the job site. They can enter their note here, and for each line here, they can actually click on these, and it takes them into a screen like this. In here, they can update the delivered quantity. It does default to the maximum quantity, but this is where they can adjust it if necessary. For Jensen, we have to record whether or not in some states the product was set into the ground. We do that by using this toggle here. Super easy for the driver to just click that and make note of, yes, I set this in the ground or I didn't. Once they've gone through and checked out each shipment line, it then takes them to the delivery summary, which is more for the customer. So we've grabbed those GPS locations here. We have the customer name, job name, again, shipment number. Below here, we have these items delivered, so same list. They can check the delivered quantity. They can do the same thing where if they tap on one of these lines, it expands into that full screen view there. This is where that email would default to, or they can enter a new one in to receive that email with the POD attached. And then they just enter their name here, report the delivery. And then this is when it displays for the driver if they want to see this. So this is our POD document that we create in the flow. So this just lists out similar information, but delivery address, customer address, contact, sales rep, who delivered it, and each item on the shipment as well. If it was a package part, it would show components that go into the package part as well. And again, this is what we're putting for the signature due to COVID. But before we were collecting signatures and displaying them there. And then also the printed name of the person who received the product. And then this is the last screen here with where the driver would upload those images. So they can either take the picture or choose the file if they already did take the picture. I know our truck drivers do both. And then after that, it would take them back into the flow again and they could start the process again. So this is that's our POD document there. And I think it's used every day here. And I think our truck drivers do really, they really came around to it and enjoy using it instead of paper. So that is it. I'll pass it back to Josh.
Thank you, Sophia. Yeah, that's proven to have been a pretty good flow for us. It makes it easier for the customers, makes it easier for the drivers. Again, gives us more reliable information and data. And I'm going to go ahead and share something as well. One of the things that it has allowed us to do is we have this this dashboard that we've created that's on all of the executives' television screens in their offices. And on this right-hand side over here, we have a little map with GPS coordinates, putting markers for each of our shipments for the current day with the images from the deliveries. So it allows our executives to have like real-time visibility into what we're delivering on a day-by-day basis. This is something that we wouldn't be able to do if we hadn't, transitioned over to using Novacura instead of our paper process. It's been really beneficial for our executives in making business decisions on, where we need to allocate resources and that kind of thing. And plus, it's just flashy and cool, which is always good. All right, let me share now. We'll get into some of our headless stuff. Excuse me. So as you can imagine, being in the IT department, we have some things that that we have to deal with as well in terms of process and data that that are kind of unique to us. But an example of an issue where we've had problems in the past is on status change of employees, right? So we have currently about 500 users out of our over 1,000 employees. About half of them are actually computer users. So in the IT department, we have to deal with, setting up new users, disabling users when there's terminations or on leave or anything like that. And that requires a lot of coordination between branch HR and corporate HR and IT and I can't tell you how many times we've gotten a phone call in IT that says, hey, we got this new guy that started yesterday and he still doesn't have a computer or an account to get in. We're like, well, we didn't even know, or somebody calls us and says, hey, there was this person that, quit 3 weeks ago. Was their account ever turned off? And we didn't know. Obviously, that's a huge security risk. Somebody that's left the company still has access to email and all their shares and all that kind of stuff. Not great, not a great situation to be in. So we have a number of these machine workflows that run on a schedule to do a number of things, some related to business process, dealing with releasing shop orders or synchronizing data between our ERP and some manufacturing stuff. The one I'm going to show you today is something that we use for our IT purposes to help deal with that status change issue. So this is our Paycom to TS3 sync. Paycom is our HRIS. It's what our HR department uses for managing all of our employees. TS3 is the database that we use for all of our users. It's what IT uses to manage all of our users. It's a homegrown database. We didn't purchase something for it. It's something that we built ourselves. We've been using for quite some time. So this flow is basically something that that looks at the Paycom data and then finds mismatches in status between Paycom and TS3, and then will give us notifications and in some cases generate Zendesk tickets for us based on the status change of a user. So we actually handle some of the Paycom stuff through SSIS or SQL Server Integration Services. Paycom, their API really isn't that great, so we actually have automated jobs that generate CSV files of employee data on an SFTP server that we connect to, download, parse, and then load into our data lake and transform into our warehouse. And then this is a stored proc that we have in our TS3 database that basically runs a report that tells us, hey, what types of changes are there? What mismatches do we have between the Paycom data and our TS3 data? So running that gives us some information on how many changes of each type there are. So we got department changes, location changes, manager changes, status changes, title, alias, all of that. So the stored proc returns JSON, which Novacura has some built-in JSON capabilities within FlowScript, which is very nice because we don't have to code a bunch of stuff to parse through data or make a bunch of steps in Flow to go through record sets and evaluate it. So returning it through JSON and using FlowScript's built-in JSON decode, gives us easy access to a lot of that data. So once we parse that, as soon as this wants to respond, sorry, I'm on a VPN right now, so it's sometimes gets a little bit laggy. We verify that we have changes. If there are some changes, we will go through, and for the status changes, we go through and we list each employee, what the TS3 status is and what the Paycom status is, and we basically build a table using, again, the JSON decode from that. If we have those changes, then we will go through and we will get the user info from our TS3 data. We will evaluate the status changes so we can see of the different types of status changes. We set what the action should be based on that type of status change. So if it's not hired, terminated, or retired, it's an email notification. If it's on leave, it generates a ticket. And if the status changes to active or on leave, then it also generates a ticket. And then it's also in here generating an HTML string, basically, that we set as the body of either an email or the body of a ticket that will go into Zendesk. We assemble all of that into a record, and then we go through, and if it's on leave, we basically have hard-coded right now one of our HR reps to be a CC on any of the tickets. We do the talent manager lookup. Talent manager is the term that we have for basically a specific employee's HR representative. They will also be a CC on either the email or the ticket. Oh, I'm in edit mode. Okay, so if it's an email, then we basically send it to I send it to myself, because I will verify with HR before we do any actual termination stuff, just in case, you know, we get a notification, but let's say it's an involuntary termination. We don't want to start processing things before that event has actually happened, so we'll verify with HR before we actually take action on it. We use the subject and the body based on the logic that we had in our script step beforehand. If it's an on leave or a leave return, we generate a ticket for this. So in Zendesk, you can have what's called a problem ticket, and that can have a number of incident tickets that are children to that ticket. So we'll create a problem ticket in Zendesk, which we have a fragment for actually creating. And here's our fragment here. We use this fragment all over the place. Any place where we have to create a Zendesk ticket, we've got all the logic here using the REST web services connector, using the Zendesk REST API. We pass in all the information that's needed for a ticket, for creating a ticket: requester email, assignee email, subject body, status, collaborator emails are the CCs. The Zendesk group that it should be applied to. We have a number of groups that help us with our ticket assignments. Type, priority, problem ID, all of that. And then we will go through and we get the Zendesk groups. We get the group ID based on the textual group that we had sent in before. We get the requester. Again, this is using the Zendesk REST API. We send over the email. This actually sends the email off to Zendesk and will return to us our user ID that we can use when generating the ticket. Assuming we have an assignee, we can do the same process as we did for the requester, where we send off the email address, get an ID back, and then use that for creating the ticket. If we don't have an assignee, we create the ticket without it, and it just goes into the unassigned queue. And then we get the ticket number, exit this, go back into here. And now we have the ID for the problem ticket that we have created, which will then be used in the other tickets that we generate, like the ticket for changing their TS3 status, creating the ticket for securing their email, phone account, Salesforce account, all of these things. And when we generate each of these tickets using the same fragment, we pass that problem ID along with it, so they're all related to that specific problem. Here we check to make sure that the Salesforce user exists. Again, this is using the REST connector for Salesforce that we had set up. And this basically just checks to say, hey, does this user have an active account? Because if they don't, then we don't generate that ticket for it. But if they do, then we generate the ticket saying, hey, we have to secure this account. We do the same thing with IFS. We verify that the IFS, that the user exists in IFS, that their account is active. And if those are true, then it generates a ticket for securing that account as well. And then we will basically iterate through any status changes that we have for that. Once all of those have been completed, we run our stored proc again, but this time passing a 1 as the first parameter, meaning that it runs not as read-only, it actually allows the changes into TS3. We parse our response, again, using the JSON decode, and then we assemble an email body that will basically give us a summary of all of the changes that were made. And then that email gets sent off again to myself, as well as an email address that we set up called change control, that is basically just a log that we keep of all the changes that have happened. And this runs every couple of hours. So once we set this up, we've basically vastly decreased the number of surprises that we've had to deal with in IT in terms of user status changes, and helped us with our security in terms of termed users having access and that kind of stuff. So we have a number of machine workflows like this, some with much less complexity, some with far more complexity. But it seems to work pretty well for us. We build these things out, they start running, we set them on a schedule, and for the most part, we kind of don't even remember that they're running until something wonky happens in one of the systems and something doesn't work quite right. We're like, oh yeah, that's right, we've automated that process now. So Novacura has really helped us out a lot in that sense. We've got a lot of things running that basically have taken a lot of work off of our shoulders, a lot of manual steps off of our shoulders. So that is our headless flow. So now you've seen some of our mobile stuff, some of our headless stuff, and I think with that we can go on to the Q&A section. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing. I'll pass it back over to Ben to moderate that.
Awesome, thank you. So great presentation, much appreciated. Hopefully my screen will share here in a moment. Looks like it went back through this slide. Approved delivery app, I mean, that's obviously a pretty big project. One of the questions that we had from the chat was Chris Miller was asking how you're attaching those images to send them to IFS. Is it through the shipment, or is it through an FTP connector?
Yeah, so what we upload the images using FTP. So in IFS, there's two ways that you can attach your documents for their document management module. You can either store the documents directly in the database, or you can store them in an FTP server and then relate those two things. We chose the FTP method. So we upload them to the FTP server, and then within IFS, we create these document object connections that will create a document that has basically a path on the FTP server. So within IFS, if you're on the shipment, you can view those documents within the ERP. You don't have to go into some separate FTP thing to do it.
Nice. Somebody made a comment, not a question, but just said very impressive, showing sort of the different functionality that you used in Flow throughout those apps. So kudos. The next question is from an internal employee, Jeffrey. He asked, how many transactions are being processed throughout your organization using Novacura each day?
It's a good question. I don't have the actual number in front of me, but if I had to guess, I mean, from POD alone, we've got a fleet of roughly 70 trucks that are making multiple shipments a day. So just from the POD app, we've got hundreds there. We have flows that help salespeople with adding addresses and contacts to customers for orders. That's likely also hundreds a day. So we're probably in the thousands when all is said and done.
Nice. And is it pretty seamless? Like, what's the experience been? Or have there been backups on the IFS side, or what are the challenges there?
For the most part, it's been pretty seamless. The issues that we've had, most of the issues that we've had, have been due to the lack of technical expertise throughout the organization. However, I will say that the interface that Novacura helps you to build, through the user steps, there's two ways you can look at it. One, it's fairly simplistic, so it doesn't give you a lot of options for customizing your interface, which can feel frustrating. But at the same time, that simplicity also forces you into into not overthinking a layout as well. Like I said before, I've been in development for over 25 years at this point, and the design portion of that is something that I've always hated. I'm not a good designer when it comes to UI UX, and I have a lot of respect for those that have those skills. But the amount of time that you spend on UI UX when building out an application, we just did a custom one earlier this year, and we spent 4 months just on UI UX before we wrote a single line of code. And that's something that kind of doesn't have to be thought about as much with the Novacura side, because it's like, hey, here's your options. Yes, it's simplistic, but it helps you to kind of push through that. And it's a case where, for these simple flows like POD, where it's just a series of steps and there's a series of things that people need to review information and just fill out a couple of fields, it really helps you push past that. So while I think there are some areas in which it could be viewed as a limitation, it can also be quite a strength to help you through that as well.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, having talked to a lot of customers over the years, and especially customers going from paperless to, a mobile app, it's also just huge not having to deal with that paper, like you said, drivers
Yeah,
on the road for a long time.
Yeah, and you got to think about the trees, man.
Right, exactly. We got to save it. So, yeah, I mean, it's crazy to me. One of the fun facts that I learned when I was kind of first starting and researching how Novacura works and what we've helped customers do is, like, there's a statistic, I forget where it came from. It's some consulting firm, but they were talking about how the cost to manage a filing cabinet is like $35,000 a year. So just cutting out all that paper is actually saving a fair amount of money in itself, outside of just the simplicity of not having to hand a piece of paper to somebody else to get, some part of a process complete. So
absolutely,
it's impressive. And you should be able to see the questions there, I believe, in the Q&A tab. So if you want to pick the next question, and anybody, if obviously feel free. If you click that Q&A button, we'll see it in the queue, and we'll respond to them. We still have 10 minutes of Q&A. So
okay, I see the next question on here is also from Jeffrey Maynard. How long would your Novacura solution have taken to develop through traditional means? For the POD one, that, especially at the time that we built it a couple of years back ago, that would have taken a substantial amount of time. We needed it to run on a mobile device. Our drivers use iPads. iPads were chosen because of a limitation of our e-log system that we use. We use Verizon Connect for that. A couple of years ago, there's a federal mandate that truck drivers had to be keeping electronic logs rather than written logs. So we chose Verizon Connect for doing those e-logs, and that only ran on iPads. So we were locked into that platform. Developing, we didn't have any like iOS development skills on staff, so we would have had to contract that out. I would imagine that between requirements gathering, design, and development, that we probably would have been well over a year into development on POD before we'd have had something workable for that, as well as all of the contract costs. Admittedly, at Jensen Precast, we are not the best at our requirements gathering beforehand. A lot of our processes haven't been as well defined as they should be before we started a development project. So that ends up causing a lot of rework and stuff. That's something that we're trying to improve on. But especially when you're contracting out work like that, it definitely increases the costs on things. One of the things that's nice with Novakira is that we were able to hop in and build these things out. And once we build POD, now that works on Android, iOS, desktop, so I mean, we didn't have that extra step of trying to figure out what the logic of an application should be and then building it for a specific OS. Once we built it, it just worked on everything. And that was a big selling point for us when it came to Novakira as well. So yeah, I'm not sure how long that would have taken through traditional means, but much longer than it did in Novakira. And then I see the next one here from an anonymous attendee. How long did it take to set up a REST connector? That depends. We've got a number of REST connectors that we have set up. It's a lot easier now in Novakira than it was when we first started using it. There used to be like a separate application that you would have to run to build out the REST connector, and then you would basically save a file from that and then import it in to Novakira to use that, and that was very cumbersome. Now it's all built into their newer REST connector tool. And if you're familiar with REST APIs and how they work, it's pretty easy to get through. If the REST API that you're connecting with has like a Swagger definition file, I know that you can import those into the REST connector. I think it's Swagger, one of them. You can import that in and it'll actually build it out for you, which is pretty nice. But it's a pretty painless process to go through. Sometimes it can take a little bit of time if there's a ton of endpoints that you're dealing with that have a ton of different data models that are being returned and whatnot. Then yeah, that can be a little bit time consuming to go through. But I've also worked with a number of integration platforms, and it's all kind of the same process of you got to go through and say, here's the endpoint, here's my inputs, here's the output, here's the structure in which it's coming back. There's kind of no way around dealing with that because REST isn't, it's not like SOAP where you have a definition file, WSDL that you just import and everything can be handled. It gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of the data that you're dealing with, but in terms of setting up those types of connectors and stuff, it's going to be a little bit more involved. But once you've done it a couple of times, it's pretty easy. And you also don't have to, if you've got an API that has 50 endpoints that you're dealing with, but really you're only using 2, you only have to set up, those 2 in the REST connector. So it's not like an all or nothing kind of deal either.
Nice, yeah. The REST connector tool has come a long way from when it was first released, I think. Really, it's a tool unto itself. If you get familiar with it and understand how it works and are able to do those data transformations for the JSON response, it's very powerful. And like you said, if you understand the APIs, and pretty much any website or large software is going to have APIs available. So the number of things that you can access through Novacura, I think, dramatically expanded with that tool.
Yeah, absolutely. I see another question here, just out of curiosity, can your POD app be used as a backup driver log per se? To some degree, I guess you could say for our own knowledge of what a driver is doing, sure. I don't think we would want to use it in terms of backup for the e-logs because there are a lot of federal requirements on what has to be logged, the reliability of those systems. As well as specific truck information as well. A lot of our stuff is hooked up to devices that are actually hooked into the trucks that give you mileage reports and that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't say that we would be able to use that as a backup for the e-logs. But if we were just wondering what a driver was doing on a certain day, then yeah, we could probably utilize it for that as well.
Nice. Any other questions coming in? We've still got 5 minutes for Jensen Precast for Q&A.
I do see another one here. Have you thought about sending automated SMS messages through REST with your flows for delivery updates, etc.? We actually have, yeah. And we've built a proof of concept for that to where when the POD app, when we finalize a shipment, or finalize a delivery, I guess, it would then kick off an SMS to the contact for the next shipment for that driver, saying that their delivery is on the way, and then sending them a link to a page with mobile support that would kind of similar to like DoorDash, where it'll show them the location of the truck on the route to their location, as well as giving them an estimated time to arrival. That's something that's still very much in proof of concept right now, but it is something that we are planning on launching at some point in the hopefully not too distant future. We'll be using, I think it's Twilio for our SMS stuff. And yeah, we were using Novacura's REST connector for handling a lot of that.
Josh, a question. Do you guys use the new clients on iOS yet?
I'm not certain if we've done that on our iPads yet, not because of Novacura, but because we have recently been transitioning our MDM. So we're slowly moving all of our iPads over from, I can't remember what we used before, but we're moving it over to Microsoft's MDM for that. So once we get everything over, then we'll be looking at updating all of our iPads to use the new client.
Very nice. We just actually updated our own documents to showcase how to use Intune with Novacura and the new client.
Oh, very nice.
Yep.
Very nice. We'll have to look over that.
And then just a comment to yours on the REST connector. I love the Swagger comment about inputs. We also now support OpenAPI 3.0, which means you can get the later versions. Some people don't go backwards in Swagger from time to time. So it supports 2.0 and 3.0.
Oh, very nice. Very nice.
Yep. So I don't see any more questions coming in. I'll go ahead and take over. And then if there's others that come in at the end, I'm sure we can respond to those. Okay, so my name is Paul Phillips. I'll talk a little bit about some of the changes today that we've done within our latest releases, some which will probably be helpful to even some of your use cases, Josh and Sophia. We'll talk a little bit about the creation of the applications. Those things are more in regards to FlowScript, studio improvements, even new user steps like Bluetooth connectivity. And then we'll talk Oauth 2.0, which will be helpful for the REST connector, our IFS OData connector for IFS cloud customers, and even some new capabilities in regards to integration, passing what we would call binary documents between systems. And then I want to showcase some of our new client capabilities, the side-by-side views from one client to another. We'll talk a little bit about what's next in those clients as well. So FlowScript capabilities. There are a few new FlowScript options that you have when you're using newer versions of Flow. Those range from changing a multitude of colors. We now support RGB capabilities, which allow you much more color coding than our yellow, purple, green that we've had in the past. We also support selecting distinct capabilities from a table in FlowScript, powerful language to be able to sort and build data tables inside of Flow. When we get into IFS OData, you'll note that there is a need for URL encoding and decoding. So we have new functions that allow you to be able to handle sort of base 64 encoding and decoding. And we also now support the last function, much requested function. Instead of being just first, we now do last as well. So again, just a quick example of being able to select distinct from a table. So a little bit of flow script, making some tables here, and then ultimately selecting the distinct customer ID. And you'll see that we only bring back one of the tables with the order dates. I would suggest that if you want to dive into these details a bit more, there is new flow script help. One of our highly requested features was to actually update our script help. FlowScript is a language that we built, is an object-oriented style language, but it is nice to note that you can go and find good working examples in the help that have been updated. Speaking of help, I would also suggest that you take a look at docs.novakira.com. All of our documentation has been put into a one-stop shop now. This includes older versions of Flow as well as new versions, marketplace documentation. There's extensibility and integration capability. So where we integrate with third parties, how to do it. A good example that Josh mentioned was Twilio, for example. Another one that most people will integrate with is Azure, being able to access Active Directory and even Graph API, for example, can all be checked out in that extensibility and integration. It gives good working examples as well. And there are even things like flow development guidelines. What do we suggest as best practices in regards to the way that you develop the flows and maintain them long term? But we didn't stop in just those items. We also have some other nice improvements within Studio itself, starting with the icon library, which has been significantly increased. For those who are on the newest versions, you'll see that we offer both foreground and background icons. And that has been extensively increased. But to talk in a bit more detail here, we actually have changed the way that we add icons to the library. So what that means is it's become much more simple for us to add these icons in the long term. So if there are icons in here that you think we should add that aren't in the new release, then please let your services team or even your customer success team know. They should be able to get us that information and we can quickly add those to the library. Some basic user layout. So keeping towards those icons, we've now made some changes in the way that we lay out users, even things like steps. These are all just minor adjustments. But more importantly, we've done some machine step changes to allow you to keep code when you switch between one version of a connector to another. So you'll note that in this little looped video, I'm switching between a database connector both times. For anyone who does develop in Flow, probably one of a big pet peeve of yours is when you have to copy and paste the code before you switch the code connector to be able to paste it in the next one. Now it just stays if it is the same type of connector. The roles have also now easier to maintain. For those who do support the user management within the Studio environment, you'll note here by this video that you no longer need to go to each individual user to see the roles. If you click on the role, you can now see a list of users who are attached to said role. And you can even change the users from the role. So if you know user management and Flow, this used to only be able to be done from the user. So it's a new way to get at the same data. You now look at roles to be able to handle the user. So a quick glance of who has which roles, which then again, if you're familiar, attached to a menu and therefore give you access to an application. But we also support import-export capabilities now within our new versions for connectors, properties, and roles, which is helpful. This is helpful for people who are looking to sort of package an application and deliver it to other environments. If you want to import and export between 3 separate instances instead of using the subscribe functionality. I should even say, even when you use the subscribe functionality, right? Because properties and connectors also need to port over to those environments. We also have new functionality with our Bluetooth low energy connector. So inside of Flow, you'll now start to see a new event step here, which is this little icon, which is brand new to Flow, that allows us to connect to Bluetooth equipment. So think of the use cases here, needing to connect to some measurement device that you bring on site in a field service type application, maybe getting the weight, possibly getting, some style of payment notification to your device. This is all configured inside of Novacura now. That configuration happens on an event step where you have a trigger type called Bluetooth Low Energy, and you need to provide some data in regards to what type of measurements you're looking for on the Bluetooth device. Those are provided through the service UUID and also the characteristic UUID. And you can also see inside of our documentation how to quickly set this up. For those who are new to Bluetooth Low Energy, I strongly suggest going to our documentation to understand how this works first. There are some really great developer apps that are out there that help you track down these values extremely quick, so that you can get a little proof case. It should be noted that we only do support notification style. So there might be use cases out there that you have that aren't notifications. That would be like a device responding to another and sending measurements, for example. That's notification. It's not like a read functionality that Bluetooth also supports. And one of my other favorites here is the user step refresh. So for those who haven't played with this, it's a nice functionality in regards to these subtasks that we used to have. So I'm sure some people use verb subtask in their apps. I think it showcases pretty well when you have selections under a specific entity. So here, what we now offer is the ability to refresh that user step. Subtasks used to not be able to be used for the simple fact that when you looped through back to the user step of a subtask, the data in the screen might not have been updated. Now what we support is the ability to swipe down on your phone and refresh that user step. And you'll note that when you click on a user step here, there will be a new button called Allow Reloading. And I think, again, it's important to note that there are many different scenarios in which you can update that data on a user step. So I would strongly suggest reading through the documentation to make sure that the configuration you choose works for your needs. If you think about it, there could be editable data in that screen. Should I keep the new, or should I and overwrite the old, or should I keep the old and not and overwrite the new, for example? These are all examples of different scenarios that you might encounter that require configuration to use this appropriately, which can be found in our help docs. All right, so Josh talked a lot about their ability to use Flow as an integration component to be able to make systems talk together. And we've recently added the support for passing binary data between systems through Flow as an output. So what that means is, let's say you have an invoice from an external system and you want to pass that PDF from one place to another. Now Flow will actually allow you to gather that and create an output of the PDF that you can gather through tools like Postman or possibly another Flow, even store in some FTP service if required. And it looks a little something like this. So when you go into Flow, you'll start a new machine workflow. There is a workflow output type called binary output now, which is a stream. And from here, you can configure your inputs as you typically would. But what's important is that your outputs allow file type, file name, and data. And then inside of tools like Postman, for example, which is just a tool that allows you to call and play around with things like REST services and other web services, you can come in here and call Novacura as an endpoint, so that workflow, passing in some type of authentication. But what's important here is you'll note that we have some content type attached. And if I send this request, what I'll get back again is this binary data in the body that I can choose to do with what I see fit. A nice new feature for our customers who use us in these integration, data passing, and translation capabilities. By far my favorite feature. I think if anyone talks to me, I think you'll find that the REST connector is probably one of the most powerful connectors we have, but it's also one of our most underutilized connectors. And it takes some configuration, as Josh mentioned before, but I think when you learn that tool set, it becomes a really powerful connector. And we've recently started supporting different methods of OAuth. So for those who aren't familiar with OAuth 2, it's just a way of authenticating to a specific system. What Josh showed in regards to the Paycom integration, or possibly even other integrations like Twilio, is there's a concept called client ID and secret in OAuth 2, which allows you to do machine-to-machine integration. And what that means is I'm one server and I call another server. I just want to tell you that I'm allowed to talk to you, pretty much. But the problem with that is typically it requires you to grant rights to do specific functionality, and it doesn't allow you to impersonate a user from time to time. And when we talk about IFS, there are ways to do this that allow you to use what they call a service user, but for the most part, it's usually a client, and that client has some given authority. Now, what we support is called authorization code flow within this connector. And what that means is now you get a pop-up box, and that pop-up box, it asks you to log in as if you were a user. So think about the way that you log into Microsoft today. You'll see a pop-up box, you'll type in your email address, you'll type in your Active Directory credentials, and you might even get prompted with some MFA process, multi-factor authentication. This is just a way to allow you to authorize. A good example could be using this within reading emails from your inbox inside of the REST connector. But you'll note that we support all things like loading menus, starting a workflow, even seeded inboxes, for example, and downloading offline data is where these pop-up boxes need to show up. So
sorry to interrupt, Paul. There's a hand up from Philip. Was there a question? I wasn't sure if this was from just now. Philip, did you have a question? Oh, he just hopped off.
Okay.
All right.
So you'll note that inside of the REST connector, there's a new OAuth 2 authentication. It requires you to pass in specific information like an access token, an authorization token URL, client ID and secret, scope, and even extra query parameters. So again, pretty good documentation on how to set this up if you are interested. But to show this in a use case, we have a little video here going to Microsoft Graph REST API, which is a pretty powerful API if you're not familiar with it, allowing you to get access to many different Microsoft products. The one that we use here is Teams or OneDrive, even SharePoint. So you'll note that a user clicks on an application here, get Microsoft files, and they're not authenticated, so they're brought into their phone to be able to log in. Here they're using Face ID. They'll pass in some credentials, go through the MFA process, which is required, right? And then automatically be logged in through Authenticator here, which is the MFA process. And once they do that, they get a call back right to Flow, which will start to gather information. So now here, they'll start to pull in data like documents, and they'll narrow down that search in regards to the Teams files and folders, which is all called drives within this Graph API. And they'll pull up the file, which will be a PDF, and then they can open that file on their mobile device. Again, this is stored in OneDrive today, pretty much. So you can see how this could be pretty powerful to your applications. And this opens up a pretty big world of possibilities, right? Areas, again, where you might not want to do the client-side authentication, but you might need to use user authentication. This is definitely one of the more secure ways of handling it. Things like Salesforce, which is a big one for us, Jira, yeah, even Azure, right, that I talked about, ArcGIS, DocuSign could be another big one. So if anyone has any interest in connecting to a specific system, feel free to reach out. Most of these APIs now offer OAuth 2 capabilities and would support authorization code flow. Connector services. So for our customers who are hosted in the cloud in Azure, at times you might still have on-premise systems that you want to connect to. There's a lot of good examples of this. Sometimes there's SQL Server connectors on site. Sometimes there's FTP connectors. These could be behind firewalls. Now, what we offer is a connector service for many of our highly used connectors that allow you to have a connection to your on-premise applications. These are downloaded themselves, meaning that they are standalone. You would go ahead and deploy the installer on your local computer or possibly your local server, and then you would download the appropriate connector that would then start to communicate with your Flow server once you do some configuration. Again, there's some big ones here: SQL, FTP, IFS OData actually runs this way. And it has its own UI. So again, you go to downloads.novakira.com, you can deploy this exe on your server, and you can actually configure your connector there to talk to your Flow server. I think for those who have been in the cloud, you'll note that we've used other ways of accomplishing similar functions with some limitations before. For those customers on the call, I'm sure you've heard Microsoft Hybrid Connection Manager. That is still in use and can be used. What we found is performance is typically quite a bit better on these connector services. And then there's also even other ways to network these services from the cloud if required, things like VNet connections and such. So there are a ton of options to connecting to on-premise systems. This is probably the most straightforward and seamless, which offers also some of the best connectivity speeds. So I'm sure we have a lot of customers on the call today who run IFS, and even if you're running IFS 9, 8, 10, maybe, you will at some point likely try to upgrade to OData. And I think it's important to note that in 6.14, we've released a new connector called the IFS OData connector. For those customers who choose to run in the cloud, you'll see that they no longer offer the .NET Access Provider in IFS Cloud. That means the PL SQL steps that you've once written could be converted into projections and accessed through projections, but don't come out of the box inside of IFS Cloud. So what that means is you could choose to connect through standard projections, which are offered via REST API services inside of IFS Cloud. And we built a connector to support that. We are actually using this at a few customers already today, and we have also implemented ourselves on our own internal systems. So this connector is built specifically for IFS Cloud OData. What we find is that their OData, which is a standard way of communicating, is not as standard as you would hope, meaning you need some dynamic capabilities. The other option, obviously, to connect into these projections is using the REST connector, but we've sort of encapsulated all that into this new connector, which is pretty nice. And we support many different authentication mechanisms into cloud. So if you see this screen here, you'll note that this is the studio, the same studio Sophia showed before. And this step that I'll showcase here is us communicating with an IFS Cloud for what we call an HTTPS GET call, just retrieving information from the system. And you'll see that we have specific projections configured. We'll quickly pick a read function from that. So when you think of the CRUD capabilities of a REST, and then we can configure this step where we add conditions. These conditions would be similar to when you have a where clause in your select statements for those people who develop, and those can be converted to variables or could be equals, do not equal. You can pick out exactly what you want to select through checkboxes, and you can even choose how to order the data when you go and make this call to IFS. So we built a really nice wrapper around the IFS REST APIs that really do convert us to, when going to cloud, to this no code capability here, right? Instead of you having to know a little bit of PL SQL, you can really just pick the right projection and ultimately take a few, click a few checkboxes and have data coming back to IFS. So not too dissimilar, right? That's retrieving data, but there's also times when you need to write data back to the ERP system. And that is done here. So again, similar type of scenario, you select the endpoint you want to go to. These are the endpoints that have been compiled and configured in the connector. Those are a button away to turn on more endpoints if you want. And you could either create or update data. And from here, what we do is we sort of read the metadata and give you the information that's required and not required. Due date, for example, contract, and the internal customer number are 3 data points that are apps that are required to create, but the rest are optional parameters. And here you can choose to pass through your variables and create a target variable to get some output from this. Like all RESTful API services, they'll return back some output, which you can then define in the output tab right here as well. So again, for those who are familiar with writing script steps in IFS, this is quite a bit different, but makes it really no code at this point. Yeah, I strongly suggest, if you have an interest in IFS OData, you guys attend the IFS Cloud Flow OData connector session that we've done previously. You can find those on our YouTube channels. Urshad, who ran this, is really knowledgeable in IFS Cloud and goes through quite a few scenarios. I think it's a great session. So the new clients, I asked the question to Josh before here. We have new clients that have been released. They've recently been released well, I think the Google one was released a year plus ago. And so Android was released a year plus, and then the iOS probably 8 months or so. So they've been out for some time. These new clients, we've taken a pretty big assumption in them to use native interface capabilities of the platform. So what that means in layman's terms is that we've wanted to follow suit what Android does. So the Android time picker looks much like you would if you were in any app in the Android. The date picker looks like it's an Android date picker, and then vice versa, that to iOS. So for those who are iOS fans like me, you'll see that the date picker and time picker on your alarm, they change from 15 to 16, right? We follow suit in that in those changes, meaning when iOS changes their date picker and the alarm function, you'll note that ours will likely change with it. And it starts with something as simple as the menu. So these new clients, for those people who connect to multiple servers, it's beautiful. We have the 3 or 4 most recent servers that have been connected to. No more needing to remember the server or scan the code each time. Now, once you've scanned it the first time, you'll be able to select from a list. So for me, who flops between environments quite frequently, probably for the developers who develop between a dev, test, and prod instance, these type of features become very impactful. Also, home views have changed quite a bit from the old client, which you'll note over to the left, to the new client to the right. Things that we support now are search capabilities within the applications or workflow screen. Here, you'll note that the user is searching for Office, and it'll pick a list of applications. So for those who do have lengthy menus with many different applications, and users might know the exact app they want, but have to scroll through that list, here we make it much more seamless to get to it. More intuitive capabilities in the way that we pause and cancel workflow. So in the old app, you would have had to select and hold on this play button here, and that would have prompted a box to cancel the flow or start over. Now we use swipe features as an example. And you'll see here how we go ahead and collapse the menu if required. Some really nice new functionality in the way we process offline data. So in the old days, we used to have to send data in the old client in sequence. And now what we support is the ability to handle non-sequential data where one message might have errored. Here, we can actually step over that error and go to the next data if we want. I really like the offline capabilities and what we've changed inside these clients. I think you guys would feel the same way. Inputs that I talked about here, more native. So, you know, we can talk about URL inputs, input text capabilities, but we've now added these visual prompts. So for those of you who I could talk through the look. The URL is a great example of one, right? We used to have to put validation steps after these steps to error out if someone forgot to put HTTPS, for example. These things are now handled directly in the client in validation that we've built in, and URLs are just one example. Emails, for example, need to have the @ symbol and some other characters, right? Those are all things that get handled directly in the client versus the need for validation afterwards. Also, the date pickers are a bit different, right? We talked about native date pickers and native time pickers. So what's being depicted here in the screen is obviously Android, but iOS would look similar to those in iOS. The search capability is now available inside of the apps themselves. So for those people who've used the calendar view or even used the data grid in a mobile application, you'll find that long lists are always complex to find exactly what you need. And you probably sorted them alphabetically, but when they're long, they took up the whole screen and you had to scroll through and make sense of this massive data table to pick the right choice. That could be time consuming for users and arguably frustrating. But now inside of our new clients, what we offer is search capability within those lists. So that same list is brought up here. You'll note that there's a little search box up here, and you could have type ahead search to find the exact entry you're looking for within that list. So again, in data grid and calendar, this becomes a pretty powerful feature that is only available in the new clients. We have some features to allow open inline or don't open inline for your list selections. Those are now configurations. There are there's also an automatic choice, which again, if you want to read on what makes it automatic, go to the documentation. It's good information. This honestly just helps people better create a layout for their screens, right? Sometimes when there's lengthy lists that automatically open, it's confusing to a user. It might be better to have them select that list and then dive into the data. But if there's a list that has 1 or 2 selections, it's an extra click to have to open up that list and be able to pick the right selection. So maybe in those cases, you would like the user not to have to select this area here, the tap to select. Instead, you just want them to pick the option. Every click saved is some time saved within your workflow. And then we also have this scanning capability, which is last but not least. In the old clients, when you had a list selection, you could go in there and scan or even select that multi-list, but you'll note as that list grew, you had no way to take any items off of the list without diving into the list again and finding the selection and on selecting those. That's painful. So you'll see that list went from 3 to 2 with someone having to go back through the list. And now inside of the list selection here in the new clients, you're able to quickly have a delete. So if you've accidentally scanned something wrong, you don't have to dive back into the list. You also don't have to be in the list to do the scan. If I run through this video again, you'll be able to scan directly from outside of the list itself. For those people who use handheld devices, that's a pretty powerful thing. Every time you save someone from clicking the screen, you save them some time within the workflow again. So that's the here and now. It's what we've been delivered and trying to get out to all of our customers. But we've been working, much like all of our clients, on a new web client. This client will be released next year in Q1. So for those customers who use the web client, you'll be able to access this new NG web client by next year. And this is a quick video to go through it, but it looks and feels a lot more like a mobile device, and also brings in the features that you can use on a mobile device. So for the customers who have used our web client in the past, you'll note things like signature capabilities, GPS functionality. Those were features that didn't exist inside of the web client or couldn't get used as a feature. So you found yourself having to build two separate apps, one for the web and one for the mobile, and maybe make some decision steps to process that user's data. Here, we offer up a lot of new capabilities. Another nice part about this is that you actually won't have to deploy a client on your server. So not to talk too technically here, but what that means is, much like the iOS and Android deployments we publish to a store, you choose to take that application in its latest release or not, right? This will be in a similar fashion. So I think another nice capabilities about this client, you see things like expand. So we have customers who don't always like all this free space over to the left and right. Now we have the ability to grow that space. People who use the data grid inside of these clients will appreciate this, being able to see more data on the screen as you expand to use what is about 90% of the profile. Also, as I said before, we have the capabilities of having these date time pickers. So, we used to have big differences in the ways that we showed a date picker inside of the web client versus our iOS. Now, what you'll see is those fields, they look and feel the same. So they have a similar touch to the users, and the users will be more accustomed to that. So just the video showing here how they're using the expand functionality to take up more of that space, show more data, sorting data on specific columns, and ultimately searching ahead on those columns with a freeform search. Pagination inside of the data grid. Color coding inside of the data grid. Not just at the row level, but also within the specific values. Selection capabilities, adding rows, deleting rows. You have GPS controls, which again weren't existent in the old web client. So for those who want to use this on a mobile device, this is helpful. You could see the image viewer, and even the way that we handle pin steps on these clients is quite a bit different now. You'll note that there is the ability to scale down and then scroll through those pin steps, which is something that is also new on our mobile clients. This never-ending list of swipeable pin steps. So yeah, soon everyone will have access to these new clients. It looks much better, the web client. So coming next year, Q1. And there's a good talk here if you get a chance. Malin and Ola did a really nice demonstration of why we took some of the routes we did in our clients, what things we were trying to fix for our user base. And I would suggest that if you get some time, take a look at our YouTube channel, watch this. It does a good job of describing some of the features that are in the clients and why we took the approach we did. Okay, so I think at this point, I'll open it up for some questions. We ended a little bit early, which is good. So I should be able to answer all the questions. If you have any, please feel free to type them into the Q&A chat and I'll do my best to answer them. So I see one in here from Chris Wheeler. Any thoughts on giving development ability to remove the pause or go back from the user step? It's a good question. So in the new clients, Chris, the go back is a bit different. Can I ask, are you referring to the new clients or the old clients? Because in our new clients, the go back only ever goes back one step. So unlike the old ways of the user step configuration, where you could click the go back button and select from a long list of steps, we now support the individual step backwards in the new client. So maybe I'll wait for that answer, Chris. Here it is. Often users using web client use the back button of the browser. Oh, okay. It's a good question, which takes you to the main menu. It absolutely would. Not sure. It's a fair comment. I don't think that's changed within the new web client. Because of, I mean, you understand this, the way that our flow works, right? It runs in an individual instance of the web browser. So it's not like it opens up a new one and changes the path parameters every time you click a button. But I hear what you're saying. So it seems like a feature request, and I'll bring it to the client team and see what their thoughts are about it, if there's the ability to disable it. Noreen asked, you mentioned about new connectors to install on internal servers, then Microsoft Hybrid Connector. What is required to switch to a new connector? So Noreen, look, Microsoft Hybrid Connector, it works. If your guys are happy with it in the performance, then I wouldn't suggest making a change off the bat. But if you guys are looking to connect and try our new connector service and see the differences that you might get in performance, then really just go to downloads.novacura.com and install the installer, and then take one of the connector services. I mean, look, there's give and takes to both, I'll be honest, right? Positive notes are that Microsoft supports the ability to get automatic updates on your hybrid connection manager. As we make changes to our connector as a service, you'll need to go download and deploy a new arguably NuGet package within your connector. So there's give and take. Performance might be better one way or another. I would start by downloading and deploying the connector service and testing it out, right? Run it in a few flows, see if you're happy with it, see if it's better than your current connection through the hybrid connection manager that Microsoft offers. And if you don't get a significant performance increase, you're probably okay to stay. Also note that there are limitations in what the hybrid connection manager can do. So an example, FTP, SFTP, those aren't supported through hybrid connection manager today. So if you guys want to talk to those services internally on-prem, as Josh said that they did, right? And you want to do that from the cloud, then you would have to use a connector service. So not to say you need to go switch your current IFS connector to a connector service. That doesn't need to happen tomorrow. Microsoft still supports the hybrid connection manager and will continue to. But if you do want to make the change, yeah, I would start by testing it out. And then if you do have a requirement that the hybrid connection manager doesn't fix, then use the connectors as a service, which we refer to as our CAS connectors. Oh, you feel a bit of the performance issues. Okay, Noreen. Yeah, then I'd suggest trying it, right? Like, again, you don't need to go use it in prod tomorrow, but give it a shot. See if you see significant increase. And Noreen, again, if you go to, there's some good documentation. If you go to help or docs.novacura and then go to the help files, I can send you a link after this that'll help you with how to deploy them. It's a pretty straightforward process. Yeah, so I see your question here too. Can we run both in parallel? The answer is yes, Noreen, you can run both in parallel. All right, Chris, what about a find and replace for code within the studio that would search the entire flow for code fragments and then do a replace? Yeah, so Chris, that I think could be accomplished today. Have you ever viewed the XML code of your flow? So if you go into Studio in newer versions of Studio, there's a right mouse button on the workflow itself that says view code. And now that will bring up a very advanced XML layout of your flow, because that's all it gets stored in is XML. And from there, you could arguably find every piece of that code inside of your workflow and make that change. Dangerous, I would say, but possible. So just make sure whatever you're control F'ing, you take note of what you've changed right before making that type of move. But it is, I think it's possible today. Not sure what version of the studio you're running and which version that's connected to of the server, but you might need to get an update to be able to run that functionality. I love these questions. Keep them coming. Okay. I think that is the last question. Ben, I'll turn it back over to you. And if any more come through, then I will be prepared to answer.
Alrighty. Thank you guys so much. I think we covered kind of both ends of things here, as far as Josh and Sophia covering some of the cool functionality they've gotten out of Novacura, and Paul kind of talking about the future and where we're going. As somebody who worked in support for a long time, there's some of those features that he went over in the new versions that have been asked for, and I think that kind of shows Novacura's ability to be nimble and respond to customer needs. For instance, the distinct function is something I've heard about a lot. I know there's people celebrating about that expand function in the web browser. That's something that I've heard a lot. And having been in that role for a long time, I think I've just seen how we really prioritize our customers and understand that, you know, we need to continue to develop and continually adapt to their needs. So I think that's really impressive, what Paul showed, and also what Sophia and Josh shared, as far as really maximizing the potential, both as like a mobile and user workflow and the behind the scenes things that they've done with the machine workflows. I do want to highlight right here, we didn't talk about it today, but there is the Novakira Forum. I invite you all to come and sign up. Just forum.novakira.com. And you can go in there, you can ask questions. So maybe it's not a product support issue. Maybe you're just kind of wondering if this functionality is possible, or you want to communicate with other business people. I'm going to send a survey after this meeting, and we're going to ask if people want to sign up for user groups. I think there's been a lot of interest in that from when I've been talking to customers, being able to collaborate. And we obviously want you guys to be able to do that. We want you to get the most out of Flow. So, you know, seeing, I think what Josh displayed here is kind of what we're talking about, right? Maybe you never thought like, oh, I could have these machine workflows running in the background and doing these tasks that are taking up time from our developers or from people that have other jobs to do. And we don't want them to be working on those menial items if they can be doing things that are more valuable to the company and driving more value. So I definitely hope that you guys take the time to sign up and start submitting questions. We have people monitoring it, and we encourage, of course, end users to just discuss among themselves. So thank you all to the presenters, Josh and Sophia, obviously volunteering to take time out of their schedules and present today, and Paul obviously being busy trying to drive the product. You can see all the features he's delivering. So a big thanks to all of them, and also to you guys for joining. I really love talking to our customers and hearing what they're doing with Flow. I think that there's a lot to come, especially with the new web client and Flow 365. So excited to see what's next, and thank you all for taking the time.